The clatter of cutlery is its own weather. At my mother's long, wobbly dining table the air churned with gravy steam, sage, and the friction of relatives rubbing their opinions against each other like sticks in a campfire. The turkey gleamed. The cranberry sauce held the shape of the can like a quiet joke. Somewhere under the hum of old radiators and older stories, I could hear my own pulse. My Aunt Delia waited until everyone's plates were heavy and the first drinks were light. She brushed invisible crumbs from her sweater and leveled her fork at the diamond on my hand. "Well," she said, voice syrupy with sweetness that wasn't for me, "I suppose congratulations are in order for Nadia. The apartment downtown, the Peloton in the guest room, all those dinners out we see on Instagram. It's obvious she married for money. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em, right?" The room did a tiny private flinch. I heard my younger cousin Joe stifle a sound. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. My husband, Noah, who was reaching for the mashed potatoes, froze with the spoon in midair. The ceiling fan tried valiantly to stir something kinder into the atmosphere and failed. I knew Aunt Delia loved a performance. I also knew I'd given her material by not giving her much at all. The vague answers about work, the cheerful deflections, the way Noah and I split checks with ease and each had our own credit cards. I kept my company soft and quiet in family spaces because, at 27, I couldn't bear to nurse a big thing in a small room. But there we were. Small room. Big thing. I didn't marry Noah for money, I said evenly, taking the spoon from his suspended hand and laying it gently on his plate, as if resetting a scene. I married him because he reads the acknowledgments in novels. He knows when the basil is too bruised. He doesn't pretend not to see his own shadow. Noah's mouth twitched, that little grin I loved, the one that said he'd keep following my lead down any improvisation. Aunt Delia raised one penciled eyebrow. "And what pays for the basil?" "Teaching," Noah said mildly. "Community college. I mostly teach first-year comp. I make less than the basil, honestly." A few people laughed. Not Delia. She leaned back, the kind of woman who could smirk with her entire posture. "You two are cute. But come on. We all know downtown doesn't come cheap." What I wanted to say was that downtown didn't come cheap to me either. That I had splurged on the apartment's big eastern windows because I'd once taught myself to code under an angry landlord's flickering bulb, wrist aching against a thrifted coffee table, eating dry ramen because the kettle had died again. I wanted to explain that I was tired of translating every line of my life for people who edited me in their heads anyway. Instead, I wiped my hands on a napkin, glanced around the table, at my mother's lined face trying to soften, at my teenage cousin's wide eyes, at the cousin's kids drawing on place cards, and made a decision I'd been putting off for months. "You're right about one thing," I said, meeting Delia's gaze. "Downtown doesn't come cheap. Fortunately, I didn't buy it with anyone else's money." "What then?" Delia said. "Inheritance. You know your mother didn't have time to leave you anything." My mother bit her lip. Delia had never learned not to throw grief like confetti. "No," I said, and for a second, the word sat on my tongue like a stone warmed by long fingers. "I bought it because of HarvestDrop." A silence like the inside of a seed. My mother's face changed first. My father, who was patient in ways I had never learned, blinked. Noah rested a hand on my thigh. Aunt Delia frowned as if the syllables themselves offended her. "You selling kitchen gadgets now?" she said. I smiled. Sometimes I forget my own beginnings. They were small and slightly chipped and fit in my pocket like a rock. In the corner of my mind, the little coil of nerves that lived in a place called then wriggled. "I run a company," I said. "It's called HarvestDrop. We connect small farms to restaurants and institutions. We do logistics, invoicing, and payment processing. We started with 3 farms in Burlington County. Last week, we shipped to 280 restaurants across 3 states. I felt the words land. They didn't bounce. That was new. Aunt Delia's smirk faltered, and then reassembled itself into something brittle. "A little delivery business?" she said, as if on trial. "Who finances this, then?" "I do," I said. "With revenue. With a microloan from the community bank I used to code web pages for. With my savings from freelancing. with the hours between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. when I didn't own anything except my time. Joe said softly, "You never told me." I looked at her. She had Dad's lashes and a hunger I recognized. I kept it quiet here. I didn't want to spend dinner answering questions like, "Is this cute?" I said, and I smiled to try to soften that, because my honesty usually wore sneakers and sometimes trampled. "Cute," Delia sniffed. "I didn't say cute. I said you're smart to consider your options." "What you said," I replied, "is that I married for money. And what's true is I built something that brings good food to people and fair prices to farmers. And I did it without Noah's money, because we promised each other we wouldn't owe our love to our bank accounts." Across from me, my mother's eyes grew wet. She reached for my hand and squeezed it with the ferocity of regret and pride. My father cleared his throat. "I knew she was always on that laptop," he said, attempting levity. "I didn't know the laptop contained a truck." "Not one truck," Noah said. He had recovered from the mashed potato freeze and was now comfortably dry-humored. 12. And an algorithm that makes them all dance. Delia's mouth made a shape like she'd bitten into lemon rind. "An algorithm," she repeated slow. "So this is one of those apps." "Yes," I said. "But also no. It's software in trucks and people in dirt." She turned to me fully then, leaving her plate untouched. "Why didn't you say?" I thought about the year my aunt had told me that the worst thing a woman could be was too much, and the year after when she told me the worst thing was being a show-off. I thought of the Thanksgiving when I brought homemade pumpkin pie with a brulee top because I liked the flinty crack of sugar and she'd said, "Sweetheart, next time just buy it. Don't try to prove you can set the world on fire." "I didn't say," I answered, "because quiet is how it grew. Because I wanted my work to make noise in places where noise makes sense." Aunt Delia folded her napkin slowly, folding and refolding until it was a secret too stiff to keep folding. She studied me. She glanced at Noah, doing a quick arithmetic of him. Nice shirt, scuffed boots, eyes like a sky that changed every 5 minutes. She turned to my mother, who nodded once like she'd just sneezed, and had decided to bless herself. "You expect me to believe," she said, "that those sweet potatoes came from your little network." I laughed, couldn't help it. "Those sweet potatoes," I said, "came from Carla and Louis's farm near Hamilton. The turkey was from a family cooperative in Lancaster. The Brussels sprouts were from Perry's. They're the ones who ran the farmer's market stand when I was in high school. He used to save me the ugly ones because I always said they tasted better when they were a little odd." "How do you know?" asked Joe, half awe and half accusation that I had kept a story from her. "How can you be sure?" "Because," I said, pulling my phone from my back pocket, "I assigned the routes." I swiped and the dashboard came up. A grid of boxes in Queasy Mango and Confident Green. Latency bars. Delivery windows. Names I knew with a tenderness not unlike family. The farms and the restaurants, the drivers. I turned the phone so it faced the table. Joe leaned in so close a piece of her hair fell onto my plate. I flicked it gently away. One of the kids had to stand on the chair to see. "That little tractor icon," I pointed, "is Manny. He picked up the greens at dawn. He's probably home now, finally. That's his little daughter's drawing on his route sheet. She thinks his truck is a spaceship." At spaceship, the kid's head snapped up. Noah made the, "I told you it was more interesting than grading papers" face. "It's a business," I said. "And it's mine." Aunt Delia stared at the phone, then at me. I couldn't tell if she was recalibrating or doubling down. Another aunt would have apologized there, pivoted to imagining the groceries she could procure, or asked if my company could help her friend's diner on Cranberry Road. Delia's talent, if it could be called that, was the refusal to lose. She lifted her chin. "Fine," she said. "But somebody had to give you that first $1,000. You had to know somebody. You had to marry into something." I took a breath, not the kind you take when you're about to dive, but the kind you use to return from underwater wholly yourself. "Okay," I said. "Story time. Once there was a laundromat with a flickering sign that said LADROMAT because the U and the N were ghosts. Above it was a space the landlord called an office, but what he meant was a broom closet with pretensions. It smelled faintly of fabric softener and wet pennies. You could hear clothes tumbling at all hours, and every time a spin cycle hit its stride, the floor shivered beneath your chair like the whole world was shucking off what didn't fit. That office was mine, and it was entirely mine. The key made a satisfying sound in the lock, a small brass applause each night at 10 when I arrived for my second shift. During the day, I wrote landing pages and built online catalogs for other people's businesses, bakeries and barbers, and a shop that sold only imported Jared fish. I loved making simple things clear. I loved watching someone's face when the "Contact Us" button got them their first order. But after hours, my laptop and I fell in love with puzzles. I kept a notebook, a disheveled thing with bent corners, where I wrote down farmer complaints from the markets, the 100-year-old boredom of invoicing by hand, the missed payments when the chef left town, the catch, 22 of harvesting only if someone promised to buy. Meanwhile, restaurants texted me at midnight and said, "I need 6 cases of kale tomorrow, and I don't care from where because brunch is a beast." The puzzle seemed obvious. Build something between them that held like a handrail. I sketched screens and database tables. I taught myself the difference between a graph that was pretty and one that was honest. The app one coded the first winter looked like something you'd give a toddler to play with on a long car ride. Big squares, big words, big mercy for big thumbs at 5 a.m. I named it HarvestDrop because it sounded like the exact arc food took to travel from soil to skillet. A lift and then a give. The first farms I recruited were the ones who had given me change in nickels when I was a teenager and short $1 for eggplants. I sat at their kitchen tables with iced tea sweating onto old tablecloths and showed them how easy it was to click the picture of a tomato and set a price. "What about pictures?" one asked, and I pulled a wrinkled white poster board from my backpack and set up an impromptu studio by the window. That day I learned that the prettiest tomato is the one you can see in your mind when you bite into the plainest sandwich. I drove orders myself at the beginning. I borrowed my cousin's pickup, the one that smelled permanently of hay, and I learned to shift gears with the gentleness of someone apologizing for something she didn't do yet knew how to fix. I brought crates up narrow restaurant stairs and tried not to stare at the chef's knife set, as if each blade could also slice me open. In the afternoons after the drop-offs, I drove to the community bank and deposited checks that smelled faintly of time. I learned to love the way money looked when it had done something good on its way to sitting in an account. The first $1,000 was mine, not from marriage, but from billing a dentist for a new website that didn't look like a maze you'd die in. The second 1,000 was a microloan from a bank manager who'd watched me carry in those crinkled checks for a year and decided my stubbornness was collateral. The third 1,000 came from the first week we matched 9 farms to 11 restaurants, and nobody called to say their greens were yellow by the time they arrived. I hired very slowly. First Manny to drive. He showed up to the interview with grease on his knuckles and a love for crosswords I still don't understand but admire. Then Roberta to manage the farm side of the app because she understood that spinach wilted when you just said the word summer too loud. Then Sarai, who could look at a zip code and feel in her bones what route made sense. We kept the office above the laundromat because the rent was $60 and the floors shivering felt, somehow, like encouragement. There were days that made me feel like I had washed my hands with gravel. The day a restaurant closed 3 days after opening and I had to call Perry from the farmer's market and say, "We'll pay you from the reserve, I'm sorry." The day a truck broke down and a wedding went without basil, and a chef cried into his sleeve, and I offered to run to the grocery store myself, and he laughed too hard for it to be truly mean. There were days that made me feel like a secret had opened a window for me. Noah wandered into this story when I had moved our HQ to a warehouse with daylight. He came to a community class about food systems because he wanted to offer his students a field trip that wasn't a landfill or a museum. He asked smart, not showy questions. He disagreed with me once about whether we had a responsibility to offer discounted pricing to schools. He wasn't wealthy. He had a small car whose bumper was held on with hope. He knew which shelf at the thrift store hid all the good wool. He had exactly 2 pairs of pants, and wore them until the pockets grew holes that made him curse quietly in public when his keys fell through. On our second date, he watched me schedule 4 routes before dessert. He said, "I know it sounds shallow, but I think I just fell a little in love with the way you drag and drop." And I laughed so hard I nearly knocked over my water. From the beginning, we had a rule: separate accounts, separate dreams, shared life. It wasn't romantic in the way movies teach you romance, but it felt like being taken seriously as an adult in the kind of way my own aunt never had. We talked about the value of each check like we were 2 people building a table from scratch. We didn't carve our initials into it like some inscription against theft. We cooked on it and sanded it and wiped it clean when the sauce slid into the cracks. 2 summers later, HarvestDrop moved into a bigger space. I hung the first sign myself. It was heavy and my arms shook, and Manny stood beneath the ladder in case everything I had built wanted to get to the ground faster than I did. I made 2 choices that month that announced themselves in my marrow. I gave everyone on the team a real paycheck and real benefits, and I told my family nothing. I told myself I was protecting the work from the relentlessness of Thanksgiving conversation. What I was also protecting was a little girl who grew up learning to take up the space she needed as long as she could fold herself into a drawer whenever someone asked. A little girl who'd been told that ambition was a citrus peel, pretty, bright, bitter if you bit down. At the table, the story softened the edges of the room. The radiator hissed. The gravy skin slowly cooled into a film the cousins would later peel with their fingers and shudder theatrically over. I put my phone away. Noah squeezed my knee. Joe's eyes were bright with possibilities and the squeak of doors opening in her mind. "Why today?" Aunt Delia asked. "Why now?" Because the more I chose quiet as a strategy, the more it flattened me. Because I was tired of performing a life where the luck I won in the lottery of love overshadowed the sweat I had shed in work. Because Thanksgiving is a set of rituals: gratitude, carving, passing, asserting, retreating, and I wanted to add a new one: telling the truth even when it doesn't fit easily between the yams and the rolls. Because, I said, "I'm tired." Delia looked ready to parry. Then something delicate happened across her face. What could have been understanding or the first silt of mourning for a story about me she had loved telling. She glanced down at her plate, as if the answer might be hiding under the stuffing. She sighed, and it sounded like a jacket unzipping. "You have employees," she said, quieter. "Payroll." "Yes. That's a lot of responsibility." "It is. You always did have that look," she mused, almost to herself, "like you'd help carry the piano if you had to." "I'll build the dolly instead," I said, and we both smiled in the kind of truce that knows truce is not resolution, but at least it is not war. "Can I see it?" Joe whispered. "Tomorrow?" "The trucks." Noah spoke before I could. "We're making a Friday run to the community kitchen," he said. "Leftover produce, pies, bread. It's sort of a tradition now. You can come." "I want to go," said one of the kids, who had done nothing but draw a turkey in profile with intense focus all through my monologue. "Trucks." My mother wiped her eyes and turned to Delia. "We could all go," she said. "You can ask all the practical questions." Delia, to her credit, didn't look horrified. She took a thoughtful sip of wine. "What time?" "We leave at 7, I said. 7, she said, then caught herself. "Right. Which is when a lot of people have already done half a day's work." It was almost an apology, and I took it like a thin cookie. Gone in one bite, but still something. We ate. Stories slid back into their usual channels. A few pebbles placed to divert the flow changed the way water bent around us. Uncle Luis regaled the table with a tale about trying to fix his neighbor's fence and making it worse. Someone brought up the year Aunt Carol, aunt-in-law, really, forgot to remove the bag of giblets, and we all nearly died of embarrassment together. Delia watched me in tiny, sideways ways, as if I might turn back into the person who married a bank account if she blinked too slowly. After pie, after everyone had made the kind of happy groans that can only be translated as love, I stood to help my mother clear plates. Aunt Delia stood with me. We moved together, a choreography we both knew by heart: scrape, rinse, stack. "Do you need investors?" she asked low. I'm being careful about that, I said. I want to make sure we keep our promise to the farms. I don't want to take money from someone who sees them as just a line item. She considered me, then the sink, then me again. I can't imagine anyone would know how to talk to a farm with the respect bag of money people require. Some do, I said. Some are learning. She nodded. There were years in that nod. Roads we hadn't taken. The one we were on. You made a thing, she said. I did. You're the boss. Most days, I said. The weather is actually the boss. She surprised me, reached into the dishwater and squeezed my hand. It was quick and slippery. Maybe she had always wanted a niece whose story was easier to hold. Maybe I had wanted an aunt whose mouth wasn't a megaphone. But not tonight. Tonight we only needed this, a handshake in a sink. Friday dawned clear and tinctured with cold. The warehouse, tucked behind a row of nondescript buildings, looked almost pretty in the weak light. Our name on the door, a mural Manny's daughter had helped paint, tiny stars on a giant carrot. The trucks sat in their row like sturdy punctuation. Delia pulled into the lot behind my parents. She got out and wrapped her scarf around her neck with the efficiency of a woman who has made moves in her life. Joe bounded out first, teeth chattering with excitement. "Trucks," she said reverently, as if they were sacred, which in some ways they were. Inside, the team looked surprised to see civilians. I had texted them about the visitors. They did a good job rearranging their faces into welcoming rather than alarmed. Roberta came over, hands already moving as if wringing invisible dishcloths. "Morning, boss," she said. "We've got 3 extra crates of greens that didn't make it out yesterday. And Manny says Route 3 is a mess because they paved one of those roads with good intentions again." "We'll reroute," Sarai called from her desk. "Manny's always dramatic in the morning. He gets sentimental about asphalt." Delia stood near the whiteboard. On it, a list of farms with little doodles I'd added over time. An accident I never erased because when I drew a tiny beet with lashes next to Perry's, he had laughed and called it Miss Beet. She traced a finger down the list, and it came to rest on Benton School District. Her finger tapped. "You donate to schools?" "We sell at cost," I said. "When we can donate, we do. Today, the community kitchen gets the sandwiches our restaurant partners didn't sell yesterday. It's complicated because of regulations, but we try." "HarvestDrop is a verb," Joe said, like she was trying the word on in her mouth. "Does it work like that?" "It's a good verb," Noah said, coming up behind us with a box of apples. "To HarvestDrop, V. To make something heavy lighter by carrying it together." Delia glanced at him, and then at me. There was something like approval there, grudging but real. "He's not rich," she said under her breath, almost amused at herself. "I know," I said. We loaded. Delia surprised me again by hefting a crate, without making a show of how it made her arms ache. She watched how Sarai prioritized, what color tags meant urgent versus flex, how we paired drivers so no one was alone on unfamiliar routes after dark. She asked Roberta about crop cycles, and listened with a level of attention I had not seen her offer to many things that did not directly orbit her life. On the way out to the trucks, she paused by the break room. The bulletin board was full of photos. A dog wearing a bandana, a newborn with a squint like he'd been born skeptical, a team Halloween shot where we had all dressed as root vegetables. A schedule, a printout of our policy on weather stoppages. Nobody drives if wind is over X mph, or if your gut says no. Your gut is one of the instruments we calibrate against. Delia touched the corner of that page with one finger. Something in her face loosened. "Someone has to make this stuff up," she said. "The rules for when it's too windy." "We make it up together," I said. "I write it down." "I like it," she said. "It feels like people being people about it." On the route, Joe sat up front with Noah and me while Delia rode in back with Manny, her hands around a thermos he'd given her like she might sip the truck into being more comfortable. We hit 2 kitchens and a shelter before 9. At one stop, a woman with a braided crown asked me if we'd be able to include oranges next week, because the kids asked for them, and the last time we had them, one of the kids held it like a small planet, and showed it to every other kid like he'd been put in charge of the solar system. We'll try, I said, making a note in my phone. You see, Delia murmured as we walked back to the truck. That's the kind of thing people tell women. The small thing that is also everything. Men get told how strong they are. Women get asked for oranges. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Sometimes the best reply to a new continent is to stand on it quietly and feel the grounds hum. Back at the warehouse, Manny parked and let out a satisfied sigh like he had eaten a good sandwich. We gathered in the doorway. The team, my family, the morning's gratitude. The cold carved our breath into shapes. Delia cleared her throat. I braced for something barbed. Old reflexes die last. Instead, she looked at the trucks like they were gossip she suddenly wanted to spin differently. I said something cruel last night, she began. I've said a lot of things that were named as something else. She turned to me, and it was like watching a hinge remember it could move. I am sorry. It was imperfect and late. It mattered. I nodded. Thank you. She fumbled in her bag then, and I caught the ridiculous flicker of fear that she was about to pull out a checkbook and make this into a transaction I would have to parse for years. Instead, she pulled out her phone. I know a guy, she said, and everyone laughed because it was an unexpected confession, like admitting you have a soft spot for musicals. A school board member. He's the kind who wants to be the reason a thing gets done. You could use him. He could use a purpose. Let him come to the warehouse, I said. He can lift a crate and feel useful before he feels important. She chuckled. Surgical. Holistic, I corrected automatically, and then we were both smiling again. We went inside and warmed our hands on coffee and took a few pictures that looked, later, less like work and more like a holiday than the holiday had. The team clocked out early. I told them to take home a pie. Manny grabbed 3. He always undercounted what his family could eat. As the warehouse emptied, Delia lingered. She ran a finger along the edge of the table where we'd scribbled notes directly onto the wood, because paper is a flimsy thing when you are trying to capture something alive. You're all right, she said, quiet and low in a way that made it sound like a secret. You've made something hard that looks easy. Thank you, I said. That's the job. And Noah, she said, almost testing the name against her teeth for bitterness and finding, to her surprise, none there. He's okay. He's better than okay, I said. He makes soup when I forget I even like soup. You always liked soup, she said, as if that detail explained me entirely. You hated when there wasn't enough bread. We looked at each other, 2 women remembering the things we'd shared before we weaponized them against each other. Maybe we'd always be a little sharp. Maybe that was fine. Maybe it wasn't the sharpness that hurt, but what we cut with it. Come Sunday, she said suddenly. To my place. We'll do leftovers. You can bring oranges. I'll bring oranges, I promised. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, HarvestDrop signed a contract with the school district. The board member came by the warehouse, lifted 2 crates, and declared himself more useful than important. Delia volunteered on Tuesdays. She brought cookies that were too sweet and started wearing a baseball cap that said HD, like she'd always worked there, and we had simply forgotten to put her on payroll. On a day when the wind was beyond our policy's threshold, Noah and I stayed home. He grated. I stared out the big eastern windows and let my eyes rest on the river until everything in me that had tightened into wire softened into cord. I clicked open a blank doc. I wrote a new kind of memo, not about logistics or policies, but about rituals. A little manifesto, private and practical. We tell the truth at tables. We let our work be loud in the rooms that can hold it. We remember that oranges are also systems. What you doing? Noah asked, hair sticking up, one sock inside out on his foot in a way that felt like a thesis about marriage. Editing the universe, I said. Just small things. He stayed quiet for a second, then said, I know it's late, but I'm proud of you. For saying it out loud to your family. For saying it to yourself. I keep thinking about Joe, I said, a smile sliding into my voice. About the way she said HarvestDrop like it could be a verb. It is a verb, he said, stepping behind me and hugging my shoulders with a weight that felt like shelter. It's what you do. You harvest the work, and then you drop it where it needs to go. The apartment warmed around us under the spell of our shared, ordinary quiet. I thought of Aunt Delia lifting a crate. I thought of Manny's girl and her stars on the carrot. I thought of the first $1,000, the second, the third, and the 1,000 after that which had learned to behave themselves. I thought of my mother's hand gripping mine in the sink. I thought of the way the floor had trembled under me in that laundromat, and how I had learned not to steady my chair, but to steady myself. When I drifted toward sleep sometime mid-afternoon, because work had taught me that rest wasn't a trophy, but a tool, I dreamed about a table that stretched longer than my mother's, longer than the warehouse, longer than the road between farm and diner. A table where people came and sat down, and the first thing they were handed wasn't a fork, but a story. The kind that didn't have to fit between the yams and the rolls. The kind that set a place for all the ways people feed each other. I woke with the taste of oranges in my mouth. Years will continue, as they insist on doing. There will be winters to survive and summers that ask us to go faster than we should. Delia will, in her way, continue to be Delia. She will remind me that HD also stands for high definition, and therefore our signage needs more contrast. She will scold me when I underdress. She will tell me which donors are performative and which actually write checks that cash. When she slips, as we all do, she will say, "Did you marry for money?" and then laugh at herself before I need to say a thing. Jo will work part-time in the warehouse this summer. She will learn to back a truck into a too-small space with the swagger of someone who, once upon a time, sat in a dining room and watched a sentence reassemble a woman she thought she knew. When she leaves for college, she will take with her the muscle memory of lifting heavy things with her legs, not her back. The kid who loved trucks will outgrow the hat with the carrot, but he will say, "When I grow up, I want to drive food to people who need it." And I will understand then that we are all verbs in one another's lives in ways we rarely get to witness. On some future Thanksgiving, I will bring pie again. I will brulee the top because I like the flinty crack, and Delia will say, "Burn that sugar, boss," and I will. Noah will sit beside me and take my hand under the table like he did the day I said the thing I had been afraid to say. To them, to me. My mother will pass me the rolls and I will think, for a small second, of all the times we passed other things. Judgment, anxiety, love disguised as instruction. I still won't talk about HarvestDrop much in rooms where it's not the main event. Some lessons need both unlearning and their reverse. I'll answer questions if asked. I'll hand out oranges. I'll take out the trash. I'll keep the big windows because they remind me that light is a currency, and I can pay myself with it. And once in a while, when the turkey glistens and the ceiling fan combats the smell of gravy and opinions with equal futility, I'll think about the way Aunt Delia's face looked that night, pulled between the story she'd written and the one presented to her in my voice. The way she folded the napkin over and over until she realized that what she had been doing was trying to press the past into a shape that made sense in her hand. The way she stopped. The way she looked up. I married a person who could stand in a room the size of a question and not mistake the echo of his own voice for an answer. I built a company that could carry its weight, and then some. I set my own table. And when the old story came for me, when it accused and softened and tilted and folded, I told a truer one. Then I invited it to ride shotgun and lift a crate. That too is gratitude. When Delia texts me these days, it's often a photo from a farmer's market. Carrots with their tops on like showgirls, a basket of oranges piled like tiny suns. For the kids, she writes. For the solar system. I reply with a carrot emoji, 2 oranges and a heart. On some days I add a truck. On others, a notebook. It takes a lot to build a thing, and then to show it without apology. It takes even more to watch someone shift their seeing. But when it happens, the air in the room changes. The weather of the table clears. It's its own kind of harvest. It's its own kind of drop. And it tastes on the tongue, in the mouth, all the way down, exactly like oranges. The end.